He's a Christian and a private investigator, and I didn't know if those two things really went together or not. And then when I got a hold of his bio, I found out that he's a Sunday school teacher at a Baptist church, and that confused me. And then I found out he was a Tulsa policeman before that. And so this guy's kind of mixed up, but he has and maybe he has a mixed up job. You may want to not have him as that he checks you out. I don't know. I don't know if I've ever been checked out by a private detective. I don't know. I guess you never found out until you go to court or something.
You would be the second to know.
What's that?
You would be the second to know.
I'd be the second to know. Do you have to give a guy notice that you're checking him out?
No. That's why you'd be second.
Anyway, we're honored to have Terry Laflin with us. Come up here, Terry. Terry has been doing this since in the 90s. He's got some experience in this, and I suspect he's got some interesting stories to tell. Let's see, what time do we have? You're actually on too early. It's 12:17. How much time do you need? 30 minutes?
I'll just go to...
Well, whenever you run out, if you run out of things, they do a question and answer. That always works.
Well, we'll have...
and I bet there's a lot of people who would like some questions, and you could have some answers. So would you welcome Terry as he comes to speak to us?
Thank you very much. Actually, I was at the Owasso Police Department. I think you said Tulsa.
Okay.
Retired from the Owasso Police Department. I retired as assistant chief. I was a detective there for 10 years, so doing private investigations was kind of a natural fit for me. But we've talked many times over the past about everybody has a story. What I'd like to do today is kind of share with you my story, how I got started in the business leading up to that, and then beyond that, translate that to my faith walk into business, and then go into a little bit about equipment, maybe a few questions. So my story is my testimony, obviously. Became saved as a very young man, kid really, 6th grade, at a church that still stands near where my mother's house is. So every time I drive by to go to my mom's house, I'm reminded of my salvation experience, which I think we all need sometimes. Because the devil will attack us even when we don't expect it, or most usually when we don't expect it. Got married at the age of 20. My wife Cheryl, she actually helps me in the business. I also became a police officer at the age of 20, if you can believe that. It's that's not normal. I couldn't even buy my own gun or ammunition. I had to go get somebody to do that for me because I wasn't old enough to buy it. But nonetheless, I guess they had faith in me. They hired me. At that time, you could spend up to a year on the police department before you actually had to go to the academy. And Owasso obviously doesn't have their own academy, so we had to wait for a slot to come open. So I began my field training before I even actually went through the academy. So I get started, I work up my way through the ranks, became detective sergeant. I was sergeant about 3 years in to my career, and then became detective sergeant. Had a great time, a lot of experiences. I think a lot of what I did then translates to what I'm doing now. Very helpful. As a young police officer, I really wasn't in tune with politics. I quickly learned that in some hard ways. I promoted through the ranks. I went to the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia. 1% of officers are ever invited to attend, and I was able to go, spent 5 months in Quantico. It's basically an academy for officers all across the nation that is administrative training. 85 to 90% of those that graduate from the academy usually go back to their respective agencies and are promoted to administrative level positions, which is what happened to me. I came back and got promoted to assistant chief. Now I worked under 8 different chiefs during my period of time there. Owasso was well known at the time for kind of tumult, and there was always a change in city managers, changes in chiefs. That's all kind of leveled out at this point. But at the time, I was serving as assistant chief in between chiefs when they were searching for chiefs and working for various city managers and council members, which was kind of an odd position to be in for me because as detective sergeant, I had arrested some of the council members, family members and sons, which, didn't bode well for me being the assistant chief and then ultimately having to work with them. That's where I got my experience in politics from. I had challenged one of the city managers over some budget issues, money that was transferred from the budget before we even got the budget. It was already planned. I called him out on some other things. So the relationship there was not real great. Of course, I didn't help that because at the time I was working an arson conspiracy, mail fraud case, and I was appearing before the federal grand jury, and I would just call out on the radio and say I'll be out at the federal grand jury. Of course, I know he listens to the scanner, so he's calling, Chief, what's Terry up to, So I kind of added to my demise, but rocked along for a little while, and I was acting chief one week, and then the next week they had hired a new chief. She brought her own assistant chief in. They offered me my slot back in the detective division. The line had kind of been drawn in the sand at that point, and I was saved, but I was not walking as a Christian at the time. I thought I had all the answers. I was kind of prideful. I thought, what can they do to me? I'm doing the right thing. I'm not doing anything wrong. But the line had been kind of drawn in the sand, and it was kind of one of those, if not now, when kind of deals. So before I went to the FBI Academy, I'd already determined that, it was probably time to move on because of the political climate and the way things were going. So when I came back, after being gone for 5 months, it hit me. It was like, yeah, okay, it's as bad as I thought it was. But I had my plans, and I thought my plans were going to come to fruition, and that's how things were going to work. But as it turns out, I opted to go ahead and take a severance, and also took a vested retirement and got out. I had an opportunity to go into business with another investigator in town doing private investigations, which I was already doing part-time. But then ultimately it turns into my full-time. I say that, Gary Richardson mentioned last week, Proverbs 16:9. In their hearts man makes his plans, but God establishes his steps. I was unaware of it at the time, but God was establishing my steps. Well, when I left the police department, I was doing some work for the sheriff's office. I helped them with accreditation, helped them get nationally accredited, rewriting policy. I wrote the security policy, the courthouse security policy, which was the first original courthouse security policy that they had, and they've since obviously built upon that with technological changes and staffing. Still doing private investigations, but then I had a few security deals that I was still doing. Any police officer has sideline deals that they do, but I really was kind of floundering. For 5 years after I left, I was really kind of bitter the way things worked out. And I wasn't looking to God. I was relying on myself and my pride and my plans. Well, my plans were not God's plans. But it took me 5 years to get over that. And when I got over that was when I finally turned to God and said, okay, I'm letting go of the reins. You're in charge. How many times have we been in that situation where we've tried to control things and do things our own way, but God has a whole different plan for us? Well, that was true for me. I just didn't see it at the time. Well, since then, I broke out on my own, started my own private investigative business. 2 weeks after I announced that I was going to do that, my wife came to me and said, I've just been laid off my job of 20 years. Well, you can imagine what's going through your mind at that point, because she was always kind of, during that period of time, she was always kind of my safety net. She's got the secure job. When you're building a business, it takes a little while to get it ginned up, so to speak, and get your established clientele and get things rolling. But when she came and told me that, she added one thing. She said, I'll tell you, I'm at peace with it. And I told her, and I said, oddly enough, so am I. Up to that point, I would have been fretting over it. I would have been worried about it, but neither one of us had a concern. And I think that's because we were relying on God. Up to that point, I had been doing that. Things started to change in my life when I turned loose and let God have the reins. Business started to grow. Things progressed. So how then does all of that relate to what I'm doing today? In my Christian walk, I try to treat everybody the same, whether they're the wealthiest client or they get a client that can barely afford to pay. Like a lot of attorneys do some pro bono work. You'll see somebody that's really in need. I deal with some Christian law firms, and people at the church say, "Hey, can you help this individual out?" It's like, sure. I mean, it's what we should do as Christians, right? So I wanted to establish the fact that it was a Christian-based business. So when I've got a different card now, but and I will actually still have both cards, depending on what I'm doing is the card I'll hand out. But I wanted to put something on there to let people know, number one, I'm a Christian, and get them to inquire as to what this verse meant. I wanted to put a verse on there that was applicable, that was relevant. But I didn't want something that some enterprising young attorney was going to slam me over the head with in court at some point. There's a number of different things that I could have come up with. Proverbs 35 is what I decided on. God's word is infallible. He is a shelter to those who seek refuge in him. The reason why I chose that was because most times when people come to me, at least individuals, they've got something going on in their life they had never anticipated being involved in. That opens a door for me that I can talk to them about Christ. I can talk to them about going to church, their faith. Couldn't do that in a corporation, right? So it opens the door. It opens the door in such a manner that when I went to get my business cards to pick those up, I walked in and the two people behind the counter have a Bible laying out. And they're going through there. I said, "What are you guys doing?" As well, we're looking at your verse. We're trying to figure out why you picked that one. They were looking at other ones for me to try to help me out a little bit. So I explained to them why I did that. And as I handed those cards out, people would ask me, "Proverbs 35, what is that? Are you a Christian? Where do you go to church?" It opened up a door that I could just walk right in. Then I could talk to them about their faith. They initiated it. So it was really easy. But I try to treat people with respect. I try to treat them fairly. I try to dig them on a bill. I've seen investigators do that. Just be honest with them and tell them up front what I can do, what I think we can do, and give them a fair price. That reminds me of a phrase that a gentleman by the name of Goeth came up with, and I heard it on the radio this week. You can tell the true character of a man by how he treats those who can do nothing for you. That's how I try to treat people. I'm not looking, of course you got to have your contacts. You're going to have those favors that you may need to call in from time to time, but I'm not looking to try to exploit. And I think people recognize that and see that you are genuine, and it displays your faith in action. So try to treat them fairly. You get repeat clients like that. I mean, you've all heard that. You all know that being in business. So how does all that relate? Well, what I've learned through my Christian walk and in business, it's taught me to be patient. I waited 5 years. Actually, God waited 5 years for me to make that decision to turn to him. Our ways are not his ways, right? Also, our timing is not his timing. He's got a timing for everything. He had a plan for me. I did not care to consult with him at the time as to what that plan might be. But he relayed that to me. He showed that to me. And I learned from that. The next thing I needed to learn was reliance on him. I don't need to rely on this world. I mean, I could sit around and fret, business isn't as good as it was last year or last month. God is my source. He is my strength. I rely on him. He gives me what I need. I'm content. That's the other thing I learned. I've learned to be content. And I have sat around and thought, you know, this investigator's got a really neat case, or he's got a client I'd really like to have. If God wants me to have it, he'll give it to me. I just need to be content with what he's giving me. And I had a guy tell me in business once, not everybody can have all the business. So I think, here I am thinking, boy, I wish I had that case, or I wish I had that client. And then I think, okay, where am I going to fit this in? I'm already running 90 to nothing. You know, God knows what I'm capable of. He knows what I need. He knows his timing. He'll provide that. It's taken me a while to get to that point, but I've learned that. And it gives you a certain amount of peace, but I don't have to worry about that. I know it's going to come through. I know, I mean, you've got good years, you've got less than good years. I mean, it's just the nature of business. I mean, it happens. So I don't even worry about that, and that frees me, that gives me freedom. Just focus on the work, focus on the client, focus on my wife, focus on my faith. There's freedom in it. And I really, really have enjoyed that freedom and that peace. God provides that peace, right? God provides comfort. That's the other thing that, you know, when people come to me with problems, I can provide a certain amount of comfort. Paul in 2 Corinthians 1:3-7 talks about the God of all comfort. And the other thing it tells you in there is God comforts you, you should comfort others, right? In his salvation, his grace that he provides. So he's comforted me. I should comfort others as we come across those who have problems that are sometimes beyond repair, it seems, but ultimately it's in God's hands to do, right? So those are things that I've learned through my Christian walk to apply to business. I love Proverbs. When you said that last week, Gary, it just resonated with me. It's like, hey, that was me. I had my plans. Teaching Proverbs in my Sunday school class right now. Love the wisdom. And a lot of you may have the Wisdom for Leaders, a little blue book that Ted was promoting. I read that a lot. I leave it on my desk. So it reminds me how I should operate, not only in my Christian walk, but in my business. Because I want to be recognized as that individual. It's going to be fair. It's going to be honest. As a Christian, we need to reflect Christ, right? We need to do that in business as well, and I try to do that. So one of the main questions that I get in investigative business is, what kind of cases do you work? Well, the first thing everybody thinks of is domestic cases, right? Divorce cases. That's what's been promoted in the movies and the TV shows and Rockford and Magnum and, you know, all those movies and stories from the 70s, right? I do work those. I work a fair amount. I don't try to make a steady diet of those. I try to diversify. I mostly gear my business towards corporations and law firms, but we'll work cases for individuals as well. A couple of the domestic cases I worked, one you probably have heard about and familiar with.